Hey, Tim Schatz here again with C4D Training. Today I have another part in our Mograph series. So this is part 4, and today we're going to go over a few more things. So let's go ahead and get started. Previously, if you wanted to use displacement, I'll go ahead and give this some geometry. So we'll give that 10 on each side. And if I wanted to do some displacement, I would create a texture. And on the displacement channel, I could say texture noise and change the height a little bit. And I apply my texture, and of course I can't see anything, so I would have to render this off, okay, in order to see it. Well, with Mograph, we can add a displace deformer. And as with all deformers, we take that and we make it a child of the cube. And on my displace deformer, I come over here to shading and I select noise again. And notice how I see this right away in my view here. So that's kind of nice. I can actually see it while I'm working. I don't have to render. And imagine, a much bigger scene where you've put displacement on a texture and you have a big scene and you have to render it off to see how it looks. And, it could take a little while. So this is kind of nice. You actually get immediate response from it. So obviously, you're probably not going to create a cube and put a noise displacement on it. But what we can do, we can create a circle, and I'm going to create a little sphere, and we'll scale that guy down a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and throw that into a cloner object. Select my cloner object, and mode I'm going to set to object, and I'll take my circle that I made and put that in my object. So now I have my spheres around my circle. And I'm probably going to increase the number of clones here, so I get quite a few. There we go. And now on my circle, I can add my displace deformer. So I make that a child of the circle. And in my displace deformer, under shading, if I go down here and I go to noise, and then I change the height, I can kind of get this sort of random effect on my little spheres. And of course, that can be animated. We could also add on our cloner object, we could come up here and maybe add the formula effector, my favorite. And I don't want to do scale, but I want to do position. And I'll do 50 in each direction. And so now if I rewind this, we get these crazy balls kind of flying everywhere. So you could add another effector, you could add a random effector or anything like that, but just kind of see the different ways that the displace deformer can be used. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and move on and create a new file here. And I'm going to create a cube. And I'm going to come up here to Mograph and I'm going to apply an extrude. And again, this is a deformer, so we make it a child of the cube. And you see automatically something started to happen here. So if I select my extrude and I change the number of steps, it starts to extrude out. And it becomes a little bit more interesting if I create more geometry on my cube. So I can create these extrusions from my cube. And the extrude object also has an effectors tab. So we could come in here and we could apply a random effector. Woo! And that goes totally crazy. So maybe we don't want position, maybe we want rotation. And we can rotate the extrusions, which makes this really weird shape. Or we could do scale, and We can scale the extrusions and get these kind of bizarre looking objects. And just for fun, let's see what happens if we throw that into a hypernurb. So take my cube, throw that into a hypernurb, and now if we render that off, wow, kind of strange. Okay, so another thing we can do here, I'm going to bring in a little spiral shape that I created in Illustrator, and make this guy a little bit bigger and hit OK. And occasionally when you bring stuff in from Illustrator, especially if you have the crop marks in, let's see if we zoom out here, you can maybe see there's my spiral. It brings in the crop marks as separate objects, and usually path 1 will be your main object and the rest will be the crop marks. So I'm going to just go ahead and delete those guys. And then also, I could drag this out of here and do all that. The other way, if I had a path, it's in like a null or something like that, I can always right click on that null and I can come down and say delete without children, and that will delete the null but not the children. So there's my path still. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here so we can see the object we have. And on my extrude, if I go to object, when I'm on from root, I get this option for a sweep spline. If I'm on per step, I don't get it. So let's go do it from root for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my path into that sweep spline. And now my objects are extruded along that spline. So if I bring this down, we can have that extrude along that spline and it'll slowly fill it in. And under effectors we have still the random effector, so if I turn my random effector off, it's not really having a whole lot of effect right now. So we go back over here to my object tab and I delete my spiral. I can zoom in here, and if I go to transform, I can make the extrusions bend to my will. So a little dancing thing, I don't know what that is. Twisting them. So anyway, kind of looks like an elephant trunk or something. Anyway, so that is the extrude object for Mograph. Alright, so moving on, I'm going to go ahead and create a new project here. Alright, so next up is the Spline Wrap tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a cube here and squish it down and drag it out. I wonder how many of my tutorials I've started by creating a cube. I'm going to have to go back and check on that. So I'm going to move this guy over a little bit, and I want to give it some geometry. So that should be good. Because basically we're going to have this bend along a spline, and so we want to give it enough geometry so that it can bend. If we give it too few, it'll look very blocky as it goes around the curve. Alright, we'll go to my front view here and zoom out a little bit, and I'll go ahead and create a Bezier curve. There you go, something a little bit like that. Just kind of smooth it out a little bit. There we go. Now we have this curve going on. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and add a spline wrap. I'm going to go ahead and make that a child of my cube. And if I click on my spline wrap, down here I have this option for a spline. Well, I'm going to go ahead and drag my spline in there. And if I switch back to my perspective view here, you can see how it's kind of made it face me, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and take my spline wrap and I'm going to go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees. There we go. And now that's kind of what I'm looking for, is more of something along those lines. And if I select my spline wrap again and I come down here, I have a mode and an end mode. The mode right now, it's saying fit spline, so it's taking my cube and it's fitting it to the entire spline. It's basically stretching it. And maybe you want that, maybe you don't, but I'm going to go ahead and say keep length so that my cube stays the same length. And then end mode is set to extend. I'll show you what that does. If we go ahead and we go along our spline, notice at the end there it just keeps going, and if I keep going with my offset, the cube will just keep going off either end. That goes off into space. Or I can set it to clamp, and it will collapse at the end and just only go to the length of the spline. So depending on what you want to do. We can also change the from and to. So if I set my offset to 0 and I can make it squish, I can stretch it if I want to. But the offset will actually animate it along the path at its normal length. We can also change its banking. So as it, this could be animated, so as it goes we could have it bank left to right. We can also change the rotation, so we can twist it. Here, let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this. So if I twist it and then I move the offset, it'll go along as a curlicue. And again, we can animate that if we wanted to. And then spline rotation, we can do the same thing. We can have it rotate as it goes around. Alright, so let's see, we're going to go ahead and put these guys back to their default. And now I want to show you guys, so the geometry that I was talking about, if I go to my cube and I change the amount of geometry, let's only give it a few here, and I go back to my spline wrap and I change my offset. If we render this really quickly, you can kind of see how it's sort of blocky here. Let me go ahead and reduce the segments even more. Let's do like 2 segments. Now you can definitely see that it's blocky. So the more segments, the smoother it will go around the curves. The other thing you can do is on your spline, for the intermediate points, instead of adaptive, you can always do uniform and then just increase the number, and that'll make the spline itself smoother as well. So then between those two things you should have a really smooth object. Alright, so next up on our list is going to be PolyEffects. And PolyEffects is new in 11.5, so if you don't have 11.5 you won't see this in your menu. But it's pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and create a new file. Alright, so I'm going to start off, I'm going to make a sphere. Ha! Showed you. And there's our sphere, and let's give it a bunch of segments here because we're going to want that geometry for what we're about to do. So I'm going to go up here to Mograph and I'm going to apply a PolyEffects. And PolyEffects is just like any other deformer. We make it a child of the sphere. As you can see, nothing happens here. And if we go to our PolyEffects, we want to set this mode to full poly segments. I'm going to come up here to Mograph and apply a random effector. And now look, our sphere blows apart. And so I can keyframe those. move down, say to 40 frames, and set them all back to 0, and re-keyframe them. And now, as I play, my sphere comes together. And you can use this with any object, really. So let's go ahead and create a new object here. And I'm going to go ahead and add some Mograph text. And we'll make that say Happy New Year. To our text object, we'll go ahead and apply PolyEffects. Okay, and to our PolyEffects, we're going to go ahead and add a random effector and our words blow apart. Take off my position, do it again. There go our pieces. All right, so show you a couple more things to do here with the PolyEffects. So create a new file. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go into my front view here, and I'm going to create a linear spline. And then I'm going to add a circle. Scale that guy down a little bit. And I'm going to create a sweep nerd and make these two a child of the sweep nerd. So if I go back to my perspective view, I have my cylinder. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a PolyEffects. And the PolyEffects, I make a child of the spline because I want to affect the spline, not the actual circle. So if I go to my PolyEffects and go to my Effectors tab, I don't have anything in here right now. So again, nothing's happening. So I'm going to go up to Mograph, and I'm going to add a plane effector. And right now it's set to change it on the Y by 100 meters. And so you notice the whole thing just kind of jumped over. So if I turn off my plane effector, see how it kind of jumps. So again, this is not really what I want to happen. I don't want it moving the whole thing over. So I'm going to go to my spline, and I'm going to change the intermediate points from adaptive. I'm going to go ahead and just make them uniform and give myself quite a few segments here. And under my PolyEffects, under fall off, instead of the shape being infinite, I want to make it, say, a sphere. And so now the PolyEffects will only affect what's within this area of this sphere. And I'm going to go ahead and make my sphere a little bit, maybe a little bit bigger. There we go. And then the other thing I need to change is under my object. Instead of the mode being full polys and segments, I'm going to go ahead and make it partial poly splines. And so now you see how this is working. If I take my PolyEffects and I move it, it takes these little discs and kind of pushes them to the side. So if I did the PolyEffects as a full poly segment, it's going to see this cylinder as one basically segment, and it's going to see it as one object. But if I do partial polys, it will enable me to do something like this. So go ahead and create a new file. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to my top view, and I'm going to create a Bezier. There we go. And I'll create a circle and create a sweep nerd. I'm going to throw these guys in there, and you'll notice when we come back here, I've got this kind of tapeworm sort of shape. It's because my circle the plane is set to XZ. I need to set it to XY, and now it's facing the right way. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply my PolyEffects again to my spline, and nothing's happening because I don't have any effectors. So I'm going to go up here to Mograph, and I'm going to select Random Effector, and on my PolyEffects I also want to set the mode again to partial polys segments, and you can kind of see what's happening there. And right now it's affecting the entire thing because the fall off for the PolyEffects is set to infinite. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to, let's set it to sphere, and move that puppy over a little bit. There we go. And I want to maybe make that a little bit bigger. There we go. And now what I want to do is I actually want to have my PolyEffects go along here so that the pieces pop out as it moves along. So I'm going to right click on my PolyEffects and go to Cinema 4D tags, and you guys can't see that, so I'm going to move that over. Right click Cinema 4D tags, and I'm going to say Align to Spline. And now if I click on my Align to Spline tag, I have a spline path option here. So if I take my spline and I drag it into there, now my PolyEffects will go along that spline, which is actually our sweetener. So I click on my Align to Spline, and I position 0. As I animate that, it moves along. And I'm getting some big kind of chunks like that, kind of not what I want. So let's see if we go to our spline, and we'll set it to uniform, and we'll give it a whole bunch of segments. And so now if I click back on my Align to Spline, there we go, get these pieces kind of coming off of there. Pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a texture for this. And let's see, color, I don't know, let's make it kind of a greenish color. And I'm going to turn on, I think I'm going to turn on transparency. And for my transparency, I'm going to apply a texture, and we'll do a noise texture. And click on that, and increase the size of the noise. There we go. So we get this kind of funky sort of see-through in parts. And I'll apply that to my worm, so to speak. I render that off. Get the slices of my worm. Let's see, maybe play around with this a little bit more. Maybe under the texture, we'll change it to a layer. And so by doing that, it added our noise channel. And I could add another shader here, and maybe let's do a gradient. And we'll do add. Maybe not so much. That's pretty good. Let me close that. And now if we render this, we get kind of this funky worm-like thing. Let's see, how's our texture? UVW mapping. Let's do cylindrical. Let's see how that looks. That's a little better. And so now if I move my position, I get these little slices of my worm. So I just have to animate that. Start at frame 0 here. Control click on the position and come down, say maybe to 60 frames, and move it to 100%, and control click it again. And so now if I rewind this and play, there goes my PolyEffects. And here's what it looks like rendered. So you can see that that looked a little bit different. What I did is I went ahead and added a light, and I named it emitter. I added an external compositing tag, and I just copied the align to spline tag from the PolyEffects to the emitter or the light, and that way they followed exactly in the same position. I rendered this off and took it into After Effects and kind of played around with it and got the result that you see. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. I'm Tim Schetz, C4D Training. Thanks for watching.